The hour my uncle sat up for at Greenhollow and forbade anyone to disturb him. Edward Wren was 26 years old the spring he inherited Greenhollow, and he had never been to it once in his life. He had heard of it from his mother in passing, as the place his uncle Hartley lived, somewhere up in the Dales, somewhere too far and too small to visit. His mother had been Hartley's younger sister, and the two of them had not spoken since before Edward was born. The quarrel was not Edward's, and his mother had never explained it, and when she died in his 19th year, she had not left him a letter that mentioned her brother at all. So when the solicitor's letter came in March of his 26th year, telling him that Hartley Wren of Greenhollow in the parish of Bardal had died of an apoplexy in his bed, and had left his entire estate to his only living nephew, Edward had read it twice through before he believed it, and a third time before he sat down. The estate was not large. The solicitor was honest about it. A stone house of perhaps 8 rooms, a garden gone to seed, a wood of about 30 acres, and a sum of money in a country bank that was enough to live a careful year on, but no more. There were no debts. There was an old housekeeper named Mrs. Burnish, who had been at Greenhollow 41 years and would expect to stay. There was, the solicitor said, a custom of the house that Edward should be told about by Mrs. Burnish herself, since she knew it better than anyone, and the solicitor would say only that Edward was not to think it strange and was not to dismiss it. That was the word the solicitor used. Custom. Edward read the letter a 4th time and looked at the word, and the word looked back. He left London at the end of April. He took the train north through the wet country of the early spring, watching the hedgerows pass from black to green as the carriage climbed, and at a halt called Bardal Crossing, he got down with his case and waited an hour for the carrier who would take him the last 6 miles into the Dale. The carrier was a thin man in a brown coat who looked at Edward's London suit and at the soft palms of his hands and said nothing about either, and helped him up beside him and clucked at the horse, and they went west. The Dale of Bardal is a narrow one, hung between 2 ridges of fell, with a stream running down the floor of it and a single rough road that follows the stream. The villages along the Dale are old and small. Bardal itself is only a church and a public house and a row of stone cottages. A mile beyond Bardal the road comes to a fork, and the right fork goes up over the ridge to the next dale, and the left fork goes deeper into Bardal, between fields walled in old grey stone, toward a place that is not quite a village at all but a clutch of 4 or 5 houses about a green, called Greenhollow. The carrier set Edward down at the gate of the house. The house stood a little apart from the green, behind a wall of weathered limestone and a gate of black painted iron, and was reached by a short avenue of yews that had been allowed to grow tall and to bend toward each other across the path, so that the walk from the gate to the door was a walk under a green roof. Edward paid the carrier, and the carrier touched his cap and turned the cart and went, and Edward stood for a long moment at the gate with his case in his hand, listening. A blackbird sang somewhere in the wood beyond the house. The stream was a thin sound a long way off. Otherwise, the Dale was quiet. He walked up the yew avenue. The house at the end of it was a low stone manor of 2 stories and an attic, with windows that did not match each other, and a door that had been painted dark green so many times it had lost any pretense of being wood. He had not knocked when the door opened. A woman stood in the dim of the hall, very small and very straight, with a face that had set itself into a particular shape decades ago, and would not be altered now for him or for anyone. "Mr. Wren," she said. "Yes, Mrs. Burnish. Come in. Your uncle has been 3 weeks dead, and I have aired the rooms every day of those 3 weeks. The house is ready. Leave the case there. We will eat in 20 minutes, and after we have eaten I will tell you the things you need to know." Edward did as he was told. There was something about Mrs. Burnish in that first minute that made obedience the natural answer. She was a woman of perhaps 70, with grey hair gathered tight at the back of her head and forearms that suggested a life of carrying heavy things up and down stairs, and her eyes were the unsentimental eyes of a person who has buried more people than she has cried over. He found later that she had buried 4. A husband, 2 sons in a war, and now his uncle. The supper was cold ham, and a heart pie of mutton and onion, and bread, and a jug of beer that was better than any beer he had drunk in London. They ate at a long deal table in a kitchen at the back of the house, where the range was warm and the dusk was thickening at the windows. Mrs. Burnish did not speak while they ate. When they had finished, she cleared the plates, and she set a fresh cup of tea in front of him, and she sat opposite him with her own cup, and she said, "Now, listen well, Mr. Wren, because I will say it once tonight, and after that you will live by it." Edward sat back. He had thought on the train that he was prepared for whatever the custom of the house turned out to be. He was a young man who had read books, and who had been to a university, and who considered himself the kind of person on whom country superstition could be reported as an interesting fact, and then set aside. He thought, sitting at that table, that he was about to hear a piece of folklore that he would humor the housekeeper by accepting, and that he would gently put away after a season or 2. He was wrong about all of this, but he did not know it yet, and Mrs. Burnish, who had seen many such young men over 41 years, did not bother to undeceive him in advance. "Every night," she said, "from 1:45 in the morning until 1:15 in the morning, the master of this house keeps a watch. He sits in the small upstairs room at the front, the one with the bay window that looks down on the green. He sits alone. He does not read. He does not write. He does not sleep, and he does not leave the room until the half-hour has passed. He has a clock on the table. He watches the clock. From 1:45 until 1:15, he sits there awake in that chair, and he keeps the watch. That is the custom. That is the thing you have inherited along with the house." Edward said, "And what is he watching for?" Mrs. Burnish looked at him for a long moment. She had clearly expected the question. She seemed to be deciding how to answer it. "He is not watching for anything in particular," she said at last. "He is only keeping the watch. There has been a watch kept in this house at that hour for as long as anyone can remember. Your uncle kept it for 43 years. His father before him kept it for 30-something. His father before that kept it. The grandfathers go back, Mr. Wren, beyond anyone's memory and beyond any written record. The watch is older than the house. I think the house was built around the room in some sense. The bay window looks where it looks because the watch was kept first, and the room was built around it afterward. Looks where it looks, at the green. At the green. Yes. Edward thought about that. The green he had come past, a square of cropped turf with 4 or 5 houses about it, an old stone cross at its centre, a small pond on one side. A village green like 100 other village greens. "And if I do not keep the watch," he said. Mrs. Burnish set her cup down. She placed both her hands flat on the table on either side of it. She was not looking at him now. She was looking at her hands. "There are 3 things I am going to tell you, Mr. Wren, and you are to hear all 3 before you ask another question. The first is this. You will keep the watch every night. You may not keep it elsewhere. You may not keep it from any other room or any other window. Chair is the chair. The window is the window. The hour is the hour. You will not let anyone else keep it for you, not me, not a friend, not a wife, if one day you have one. The watch passes from a Wren to a Wren, and where there is no Wren it passes by appointment from the dying keeper to the next, but it does not pass to anyone who has not been appointed. Do you understand that part?" "I understand." "The second is this. You will not, on any night, lean forward in the chair. You will not put your face to the glass. You will not open the window. You will sit in the chair, which is set well back from the bay, and you will keep the watch with your eyes on the green, but you will not approach the window. Not once. Not for a moment. If you see something on the green that draws you forward, you will sit harder in the chair, and you will say aloud the words I will teach you, and you will not move. Do you understand that part?" Edward's mouth had gone a little dry. "I understand." "The third is this. If the watch is missed, even once, the price is paid in the village, not in this house. The watch is paid for in this house by the watching of it. The price of failure goes out the window onto the green and beyond. There are 4 families on the green. There is a farm on the lane behind. There are perhaps 30 souls within a half-mile of this gate. If you miss the watch, mister. Wren, you will not be the one who pays. They will. That is the cruelest part of it, and that is why you will not miss it. Do you understand? I understand. Then I will tell you the words. They are very short. You will memorize them tonight. They are these. You will say, I am here. The watch is kept. Pass on by. That is all. You will not say more. You will not improvise. You will say the 3 short sentences in that order in your own voice, not loud, only firm. I am here. The watch is kept. Pass on by. Say them now to me. Edward said them. His voice was thinner than he had meant it to be. He said them a second time, and the second time was steadier. Mrs. Burnish nodded once. Good. You will not need them on most nights. Most nights, mister. Wren, the watch is a half-hour of sitting in a quiet room with a clerk and your own thoughts. It is not exciting work. Your uncle used to say it was the most boring office in England and the most necessary, and he was right on both counts. But on certain nights, 2 or 3 a year perhaps, you will need the words, and on those nights you will be glad you have them by heart. Edward had 100 questions, and he did not know which to ask first. He asked the one that seemed safest. When do I begin? Tonight, the first night of your keeping. I will wake you at midnight. You will go to the room. The clock is on the table, and it is wound. The chair is set. I will not come up until 1:15 when you are done. I will bring you a cup of warm milk then. You will drink it, and you will go to your bed. Tonight. Yes, the watch has been kept by me with appointment from your uncle on his deathbed for the 3 weeks since he died. I have kept it every night, and I am tired, Mr. Wren, and I am glad you have come. From tonight it is yours. Edward looked at her then properly, and he saw under the unsentimental face the thing he had not seen in the first hour. She was exhausted. She had been keeping a vigil for 3 weeks in a house emptied by a death, alone, at an hour when no one in the village even knew she was awake, and she had been waiting for him to come and take it from her. He felt, for the first time, that he might have been wrong about the country and its superstitions. He did not yet feel that he believed Mrs. Burnish, but he felt that she believed herself, and that she had paid in tiredness for what she believed, and that the least he could do was sit in a chair for half an hour at 1 in the morning. She showed him the room before he went to his bed. It was on the first floor at the front of the house, reached by a short corridor from the head of the stairs, and it was small. A single chair, set perhaps 6 feet back from the bay window. A small table beside the chair with a brass mantel clock on it, ticking quietly. A second small table on the far side of the chair with a candle in a holder and a flint and a tin of matches. A rug under the chair. Nothing else. No bookcase. No second seat. No lamp by which to read. The walls were panelled in old dark wood, and the panelling had been worn smooth at the height of a sitting man's elbow on the right side of the chair by what looked like a century of resting forearms. He stood in the doorway and looked at the bay window. The green was out there in the dusk, just visible, with the old stone cross at its centre and the cottages dark around it. A light burned in one of the cottages. The pond was a black smear. The chair does not move, Mrs. Burnish said behind him. Not by half an inch. The marks of its feet are in the rug, and they have been there for 2 generations. Sit in it, but do not shift it. The light from the candle is enough to see the clock by. You do not need more light. Less light is better. The eye sees more on the green when the room is dark. Yes. Go to your bed now. I will wake you. He went to his bed. The bed was in a room at the back of the house, with a window that looked over the garden gone to seed, and beyond it the wood, and he lay in it with the candle burning low, and he did not sleep at first. He thought about his mother, who had not spoken of her brother for 30 years, and he wondered if she had known about the watch, and if she had refused her share of it, the way his father's stories had implied she had refused something at home in her youth that had driven her south. He thought about the words, I am here, the watch is kept, pass on by. He said them aloud to himself in the dark. He thought about the unsentimental old woman downstairs who had kept a vigil for 3 weeks and had been waiting for him, and he was ashamed of his earlier confidence. He blew out the candle. He slept, after a time, lightly. She woke him at 12:30. She knocked once and then opened the door and said, "Mr. Wren," and he was awake before her foot crossed the threshold. He put on his trousers and a thick shirt and a knitted waistcoat over the shirt because the night was cold, and he went down the corridor in his stockinged feet to the small front room. The candle was already lit. The clerk said 20 to 1. The chair waited. He sat in it. Mrs. Burnish stood in the doorway behind him for a moment and said only, "I will come at 1:15. And she shut the door and her footsteps went away down the corridor, and the house was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Edward kept the first watch. It was, as his uncle had said, the most boring office in England. He sat in the chair. He looked at the green. The green was almost entirely dark. A thin moon was up, somewhere behind the house, and a little of its light caught the cobbled path that ran around the green and the top of the old stone cross. The cottages were dark. The pond was unreadable. He watched the clock with the corner of his eye. 20 to 1. 1/4 to 1. The watch had begun. For 30 minutes he sat. He kept his eyes on the green. He did not lean forward. He did not approach the window. He held the chair lightly with his hands, the way Mrs. Burnish had shown him, and he watched. And nothing happened. Nothing happened at all. The clock ticked. The moon moved an inch. A small wind got up in the yew avenue below and moved the leaves and stopped. At 1:15, the half-hour was over and the watch was kept, and a moment later Mrs. Burnish was at the door with a cup of warm milk in her hand. "Done," she said. "Done. Good. Drink that and go to your bed. You will keep it again tomorrow night, and the night after that, and every night for as long as you live here, or until you appoint a successor on your own deathbed, as your uncle appointed me 3 weeks ago." He drank the milk. It was honeyed and very good. He went to his bed and he slept until 10 the next morning, and when he came down Mrs. Burnish gave him bacon and eggs and tea and said nothing about the watch at all, as though it had not happened. He understood, by the silence, that the watch was a thing kept and not a thing discussed. He filed the understanding away. He did not bring it up either. The spring went by. He kept the watch every night. He learned the rhythm of it. He learned to go to bed at 10 and to sleep until Mrs. Burnish knocked at 12:30, and to wake quickly, and to dress quickly, and to sit in the chair from 1/4 to 1 until 1:15, and to drink the warm milk afterwards, and to go back to bed, and to sleep until the morning. He learned the green by heart. He learned which of the cottages kept a late candle, and which did not, and he learned the way the moon moved across the cobbled path week by week, and he learned the sound of foxes in the wood beyond the house at 2 in the morning. He learned which of the villagers came home late from the public house at Bardell, walking the Dale Road singing, and he learned which of them never went down to Bardell and stayed always in their cottages. He learned the green the way a watchman learns his beat, and he came to know it as well as he had ever known any place. He did not, in the first month, see anything on the green that required the words. The watch was, as Mrs. Burnish had promised, a half-hour of sitting in a quiet room with a clerk. He began to think, by the 3rd week, that the words might be a precaution against a thing that no longer came, that the watch had been kept for so many generations against a danger that had perhaps faded out of the world, and that the keeping continued, as such things do, by habit and not by need. He did not say this to Mrs. Burnish. He felt that she would have heard it as the kind of London thing his uncle had taught her to expect from him, and he did not want to be measured against it. He kept the watch, and he said nothing. In the 2nd month, a thing happened that I will tell you about now. It was a Wednesday in the middle of May, a cold, dry Wednesday with a hard moon, and Edward had been at Greenhollow about 6 weeks. He had eaten his supper and read for an hour by the fire and gone to bed at his usual time, and Mrs. Burnish had woken him at the usual hour, and he had gone down the corridor and sat in the chair, and the clerk had said 20 to 1 and then 1/4 to, and the watch had begun. He had been watching for perhaps 10 minutes when he saw it. On the green near the old stone cross, a figure was standing. He had not seen the figure walk up to the cross. The figure had not been there a moment ago, and now it was there. It was tall and very thin, and it was wearing what looked like a long, pale coat, the colour of old bone, that hung past its knees. Its face he could not see. The moon was behind the house, and the green was in shadow, and the figure stood with its head tilted in such a way that its features were lost in the dark, under what might have been a hat, or might have been a hood. Edward's first thought was that one of the villagers had come out to the green at 1 in the morning for some reason of his own, and he very nearly dismissed the figure and looked away, because he was a polite young man, and it did not occur to him to spy on a neighbour. But Mrs. Burnish's instruction came back to him then, all of it. The thing you see may not be a thing. The first principle of the watch is that you do not look away. He kept his eyes on the figure. After a long moment, the figure moved. It did not walk to the cross. It did not approach the cross. It was at the cross, and then in a way Edward could not describe afterwards, it was a little nearer to the house, perhaps 3 paces nearer, without having walked the 3 paces. It had simply been further away and was now closer. Its head was still tilted. Its face was still lost in shadow under the hat or the hood. Edward felt the cold come up his back then. He felt every hair on his forearms stand. He kept his hands lightly on the chair, as Mrs. Burnish had taught him. He did not lean forward. He did not approach the glass. He sat in the chair and he watched. The figure did the trick again. It moved 3 or 4 paces closer to the house without walking. It was at the edge of the green now, where the cobbled path ran around it, and Edward could see, in the small light there was, that the pale coat was not a coat. It was something thinner, something more like a long shroud or a winding sheet, and the thin body inside it was longer than a man's body, longer by a head and more, and its hands hung down by its sides, and were too long for its arms. It looked at the house. Edward could not properly have seen it look. The face was in shadow, but he felt the look come on. The look found his window, and the look found him, and the look held him in the chair the way a hand might have held him. He said, with a voice that came out smaller than he had wanted but came out, "I am here." The figure did not move. Its look stayed on him. He said, "The watch is kept." The figure was, in the time between his 2 words, 2 paces closer. It had crossed the cobbled path. It was on the grass at the edge of the green now, where the green met the wall of the garden of the house, 20 paces from the bay window, its head tilted further. Edward had the sense, though he could not have said why, that it was listening. He said, with the firmest voice he could manage, "Pass on by." The figure did not move for a long moment. Edward did not move either. He sat in the chair with his hands on the arms of it, and he kept his eyes on the figure, and the clock on the table beside him ticked, and the candle on the other table burned low. He waited. After what might have been a minute, or might have been less, or might have been more, the figure turned. It turned not the way a person turns. It rotated in place, the long, pale shape spinning slowly on its axis like a thing on a wire, and when it had rotated to face the green again, it was further away. It was at the cross. It was past the cross. It was beyond the cross, on the far side of the green, where the cobbled path ran toward the wood. And then it was not there at all. Edward sat in the chair until the clock said 1:15. He did not move and he did not look away. 1:15 misses. Burnish opened the door of the room with the cup of warm milk in her hand, and she stopped in the doorway when she saw him, and she said, "Oh, tonight then." He did not trust his voice. He nodded. She came in. She set the cup down on the small table beside the candle. She crouched by his chair, and she put one of her hard old hands on his on the chair arm. "You said the words." "Yes, all 3. Yes, in order. Yes. Then you have kept it. Drink your milk, mister. Wren, you will sleep tonight. You will sleep well. The first time is the worst. The second time you will know what to do. There will not, I think, be many times for you in your life. There were perhaps 15 for your uncle in 43 years. There were 9 for his father. The thing on the green is not a regular caller. It is a thing that comes when it comes, and we are here to send it away, and tonight you sent it away." "Mrs. Burnish." "Yes, what is it?" She was silent for a moment. She kept her hand on his. I have asked that question for 41 years, Mr. Wren, and I have never had an answer that satisfied me. Your uncle had not had one either, and he had asked it longer than I had. There is a story in the village that there was a man buried at the crossroads where the cross now stands, in a year that no one remembers, and that the burial was done badly. There is another story that the green was a place of old judgment before it was a place of grazing, and that things were done there that the country has not forgiven. There is a third story that there is nothing buried, and there was no judgment, and that the green is only a place where the country thins, and that the thing on the other side of the thinning comes to the green because it is the thinnest place it can find. I do not know which is true. I do not know if any is true. I know only that for as long as there has been a wren in this house, a wren has sat in this chair from 1:45 until 1:15, and has watched the green, and has said the words when the words were needed, and the thing has gone away. That is the work. That is what you have inherited. She stood up then. She was tired, he could see, in a way she had not let him see at the supper table. She rubbed the back of her neck with one hand. She straightened her apron. There is one thing more I will tell you, Mr. Wren, and then I will leave you. The first sighting often comes early in a new keeping. Your uncle saw the figure within his first fortnight. His father saw it on the third night of his keeping, my mother told me, who had it from her mother, who was a girl in this kitchen at the time. The thing knows when there is a new keeper. It comes to look. It comes to test, I think, whether the new keeper knows the words and will say them. You have answered the test. It will not come again for some weeks, perhaps for some months. You can rest a little in your watch, knowing that. The watch must still be kept every night, but the keeping will be easier for a while now that you have been measured. Edward nodded. He had no other answer to give. Good night, Mr. Wren. Good night, Mrs. Burnish. Yes, drink your milk. Go to your bed. Tomorrow you will keep the watch again, and most likely the green will be empty, and you will be glad of it. He drank the milk. He went to his bed. He did not sleep until a long time after, but when he slept hard, and in the morning he came down and Mrs. Burnish gave him bacon and eggs and tea and did not speak of the night before, and he understood again that the watch was not a thing to discuss in the daylight. He filed that understanding away, and he did not bring it up either. The summer came. Edward kept the watch every night. He saw the figure twice more that year, once in July at the height of a heat wave, when the green was lit by a strong moon, and the figure stood by the cross for the full half-hour without moving, and Edward said the 3 words at 5-minute intervals, and the figure faded away at 1:05, without ever having approached the house, and once in November on the first hard frost, when the figure came up to the wall of the garden again, the way it had in May, and stood and tilted its head and listened, and Edward said the words and the figure went, slower this time, almost reluctantly, like a creature that had hoped for a different answer. He learned that first year that the watch was the centre of his life now. He had thought, in London, that he would inherit Greenhollow and rent the house out and use the income to live elsewhere, and the watch had made that impossible. He could not appoint a stranger. He had only the one cousin in Yorkshire who shared the blood, and the cousin was a married woman with 3 children of her own and could not be asked. And even if he had asked her, she would have refused, as Edward's mother had refused before her. The watch needed a wren, and Edward was the only wren who could keep it, so he kept it. He stayed at Greenhollow. He let the garden have 1 summer of being attended to, and he let the wood have 1 autumn of being walked, and he read his uncle's books in his uncle's library in the long evenings before the watch hour, and he learned the rhythm of the country, and he became, by the end of his first year, a man of the Dale rather than a man of London. He became, too, a man of the village. He had been awkward in the first weeks, because he had not known how to be a gentleman in a place where there were no gentlemen, and he had overcorrected in both directions, sometimes too formal, sometimes too familiar. The village had been patient with him. The villagers knew what he was for. They knew, in the way villagers know without ever being told, that the Wren of Greenhollow kept a watch at night that held something at bay, and they had been watching him take up the duty with the kind of careful interest that does not announce itself. By the second summer, he had found his level with them. He was the squire of Greenhollow in a small way, and he did the small things a squire did. He sat on a parish committee about the repair of the church wall. He gave a sum of money in the autumn for the school. He attended the harvest supper in September, and he sat at the long table among the farmers, and he did not speak more than was needed, and he did not drink more than was wise. The villagers approved of him by these signs. They did not befriend him. The Wren of Greenhollow was not a man to be befriended by an old understanding of the dale. He was a man to be greeted in the lane, and to be asked for advice when advice was needed, and to be invited to the funeral of a man's mother when a man's mother died. Edward learned to receive these courtesies. He learned to give them back. He became, by his third year, a fixed part of the dale, as the cross on the green was a fixed part of it, and as the yew avenue at the gate of his own house was a fixed part of it. Mrs. Burnish died in his fourth year. She went quickly in her sleep, of a thing the doctor called the long-deserved rest, and Edward buried her at Bardell in the churchyard beside her husband and her sons. He had grown to love her in the 4 years. He had not known, when she let him in at the door of Greenhollow on his first evening, that she would become the closest thing he had to a parent in the second half of his life. But that was what she became. She was a hard woman in the way the dale was hard, in the way the stone walls in the fields were hard, by long weathering and by use, and she was kind underneath the hardness in a way that did not announce itself, but that he came by stages to feel. She had been Hartley's housekeeper, but she had also, in some sense, been Hartley's friend, in the sideways country way that men and the women who keep their houses sometimes were. And after Hartley died, she had transferred the friendship to Edward, and Edward had received it, and the two of them had lived in the house together for 4 years on equal terms, though they took their meals at the same table only at supper, and only because the kitchen was warm and the dining room was not. She told him things, in those 4 years, that no one else in the village would ever have told him. She told him about his uncle's last illness, which had been long and not entirely bearable, and about the night his uncle had appointed her to keep the watch until Edward came. She told him about his mother. She had known his mother as a young woman, before Edward was born, and she told him that his mother had been a clever girl and a stubborn one, and that the quarrel between his mother and his uncle had been about the watch. His mother had refused it on principle. She had said, when their father was dying, and the question had come to which of them would keep the house, and she had gone south rather than be near the duty even as a witness. Hartley had taken the duty without much argument, but he had not forgiven her for the refusing, and she had not forgiven him for the taking, and they had not spoken again. Edward listened to all of this. He understood, by the end of it, why his mother had never spoken of her brother, and he understood too that his coming to Greenhollow at 26 had been a thing his mother would have hated, and a thing she would also, somewhere underneath, have respected, because the duty was old and it was real, and she had known both of those things even when she was refusing it. He buried Mrs. Burnish on a wet day in April. He stood by the grave in a heavy coat, and he watched the gravediggers fill it in, and he walked back to Greenhollow alone, because she had no remaining family, and there had been no procession to speak of, only him and the parson and the doctor, and 3 of the village women. He hired a younger woman from the village to keep the house, a woman named Annie Cleck, who was 34 and steady, and who knew, the way all the women of the village knew, what was kept at Greenhollow and did not ask. Annie made his supper and his breakfast. She did not wake him at 12:30. He had bought a small clock for his bedside in the 2nd year, and he woke himself by it, and he had asked Mrs. Burnish, in the last months of her life, to stop waking him, because the waking by another person was a kindness he did not want to make a habit. He liked by then to wake alone and walk down the corridor alone and sit in the chair alone. The watch was a private office. He kept it privately. He kept it for 38 years. He saw the figure 41 times in those years. 41 in 38 years is more than his uncle had seen, and more than his uncle's father had seen, and he did not know why he saw more. He kept a small notebook in the drawer of the bedside clock in which he wrote, after each sighting, only the date and one of 3 letters. F for full encounter at the wall, M for middle distance, D for distant by the cross. He wrote nothing else in the notebook. The notebook was for the next keeper, whoever the next keeper would be, so that the next keeper would know what to expect. He never married. He had thought in his 30s that he might, but the women he could have married were not women who would have understood the watch, and he could not have asked any of them to live in a house where her husband sat up alone in a small room every night of his life from 1:15 until 1:15. He did not blame the watch for the lack of a marriage. He had not, he thought now, been a man for marriage anyway. The watch only confirmed what would have come true on its own. In his 64th year, he wrote at last to his cousin's granddaughter, a young woman of 22 named Hannah Wren, who was reading history at a university in the north, and he asked her if she would come and visit him at Greenhollow for a week in the summer. She came. He liked her at once. She was quiet, and she was unsentimental, and she had the long Wren face and the steady Wren eyes, and she had a way of listening that Edward recognized from his own 22nd year, before he had known the watch existed. He did not tell her about the watch on the first visit. He told her, over a long evening by the fire in his library, that Greenhollow would come to her one day, and that there was a custom of the house she would need to know, and that he would write to her when he was older and ask her to come back and learn it. She nodded. She did not press him for details. She left at the end of the week with a book of his under her arm, and he stood at the gate and watched her go, and he knew, with the certainty old men sometimes have about young ones, that she would keep the watch. She came back when he was 71. He had begun to weaken by then, and he had written to her in the spring of that year, and she had finished her work in the north and had come south to him. She stayed 3 months. He told her the rule. He told her the words. He sat with her on the first night, and she sat in his uncle's chair, and he sat on a second chair he had brought in from a spare room, and the green was empty that night. But he told her how the figure looked when it came, and what to do and what not to do. They kept the watch together, on the chair and the second chair, for 14 nights. On the 15th night, Edward did not get up. He had taken a chill 3 days before, and he could not rise from his bed, and Hannah went alone to the chair and kept the watch alone, and the green was empty, and she came back to his bedside and told him so, and he held her hand and he said, "It is yours now." She nodded. He lived another 9 days. He died on a bright cold morning in October, and Hannah was at his bedside, and Annie Cleck, now an old woman herself, was at the foot of the bed, and the doctor from Bardell was there to write the certificate. The funeral was at Bardell Church the following Sunday, and most of the village came, because Edward had been a man of the Dale for 45 years by then, and had been liked, in the quiet way the Dale liked men, by everyone in it. Hannah Wren kept the watch from that night. She is keeping it still. She is a woman of 46 now, who has lived at Greenhollow for 24 years, and she has seen the figure 22 times in those years, and she has said the words on each of those nights, and the figure has gone away. On certain nights, in the small front room at Greenhollow with the bay window that looks down on the green at Bardell, between 1:15 and 1:15 in the morning, the keeper of the house sits in the old chair and watches the cross and the cottages and the pond and the cobbled path. Most nights nothing comes. The clock ticks. The candle burns low. The half-hour passes. The cup of warm milk waits in the kitchen. On the nights when something comes, the keeper says the 3 short sentences in her own voice, not loud, only firm, and the thing on the green turns and is gone. The watch is kept. The village sleeps. And the country at the edge of the dale, where the world thins and the old things come closer than they should, is held back, 1/2 hour at a time, by a single light in an upstairs window of a small stone house at the end of a yew avenue, where a wren has sat awake every night for as long as anyone in the dale can remember.